Published 1312 Est, 5 November 2017. Updated 1603 Est, 5 November 2017. The files include allegations that the Queen's private estate secretly invested huge sums of cash in tax havens to secretive dealings of the Queen, as well as some of the world's most influential people and businesses are today revealed in an explosive leak of confidential financial documents dubbed the Paradise Papers. The 13.4 million files expose the ways the rich and powerful are protecting their wealth using a web of offshore accounts. The release, the world's second biggest data leak after last year's Panama Papers, includes allegations that the Queen's private estate secretly invested £10 million of her cash in tax havens. The duchy, which was set up in 1399 to generate a financial return from the reigning monarch, used offshore private equity funds in the Cayman Islands and Bermuda that shield UK investors from paying US tax on the holdings. Substantial amounts of money were invested in companies including Bright House, which has come under fire for exploiting vulnerable customers. Large sums were also being ploughed into off-licensed chain threshers which went bust, owing £17.5 million in UK tax. Meanwhile, Tory donor Lord Ashcroft is accused of remaining anonymous and channeling his income through a tax haven in a bid to pay as little as possible to the British government. The leaked documents show he was domiciled for tax purposes in Belize at a time when it was widely believed he had given up the status. Separately, Donald Trump's Commerce Secretary Wilbur L. Ross Jr. is also revealed to have a stake in a firm that deals with Russians who are under U.S. sanctions. Among the more bizarre revelations is that U2 frontman Bono used a company based in Malta to invest in a Lithuanian shopping center. The explosive details have come from the company registries of 19 tax havens and has been obtained by the German newspaper Süddeutsche Zeitung and investigated by 100 media organizations across the world. Just weeks ago, offshore law firm Appleby, which is at the center of the scandal, revealed its data center in Bermuda had been compromised in a cyber attack. Donald Trump's Commerce Secretary Wilbur L. Ross Jr., pictured behind the U.S. president, is revealed to have a stake in a firm that deals with Russians who are under sanctions. The breach is thought to have been the precursor to today's enormous leak, which implicates influential figures from across the world. Questions have been raised over who controls Everton FC after the complex offshore dealings of two billionaires were laid bare in the documents. Last year, Iranian businessman Fahad Moshiri sold his 15% stake in Arsenal FC to Russian oligarch Alisher Usmanov and used the money to buy a 50% stake in the Merseyside club. But secret documents leaked to the press suggest his original stake in Arsenal was funded by a gift from Mr. Usmanov, raising questions as to whether the Russians' money is now in Everton. There is no suggestion that those named in the documents have done anything illegal. However, it will pile pressure on leading politicians, including British Prime Minister Theresa May, who has strongly spoken out against tax avoidance in the past. Last year, Iranian businessman Fahad Moshiri sold his 15% stake in Arsenal FC to Russian oligarch Alisher Usmanov, pictured and used the money to buy a 50% stake in Everton. But secret documents leaked to the press suggest his original stake in Arsenal was funded by a gift from Mr. Usmanov. Today's revelations are only the beginning of the scandal, with more figures set to be named during the coming week as more documents are released. The world's top financial institutions are still reeling from last year's enormous Panama Papers data leak revealed how Vladimir Putin's inner circle and a dirty dozen list of world leaders were using offshore tax havens to hide their wealth. A host of celebrities, sports stars, British politicians and the global rich were implicated in that release. The 11 million files contained more data than the amount stolen by former CIA contractor Edward Snowden in 2013. Documents were leaked from one of the world's most secretive companies, Panamanian law firm Mossack Fonseca, showing how the company allegedly helped clients launder money, dodge sanctions and evade tax. Tory donor Lord Ashcroft is accused of remaining anonymous and channeling his income through a tax haven in a bid to pay as little as possible to the British government. Megastars Jackie Chan and Lionel Messi were among the big names accused of using Mossack Fonseca to invest their millions offshore. The Panama Papers also revealed that the £26 million stolen during the Brinksmat robbery in 1983 may have been channeled into an offshore company set up by the controversial law firm. Meanwhile, Egypt's former president Hosni Mubarak, Libya's former leader Colonel Gaddafi, Syria's President Bashar al-Assad and Chinese President Xi Jinping were among those alleged to have links to tax havens through families and associates. Today's leaks center around a law firm named Appleby, which has offices in infamous offshore tax havens including the British Virgin Islands and Bermuda. It provided the structures that helped the world's rich and powerful to legally reduce their tax bills. But unlike Mossack Fonseca, which was discredited in last year's Panama Papers investigation, it presents itself as a legitimate magic circle provider of offshore services. The Paradise Papers are a collection of 13.4 million documents that reveal a number of high-profile figures, including the Queen and Donald Trump's Commerce Secretary, linked to offshore tax havens. The secret dossier was leaked by German news organization Süddeutsche Zeitung, which revealed the equally explosive Panama Papers last year, that and called on the help of the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists to aid its probe. The dossier has revealed how the figures and organizations use schemes involving trusts and shell companies to protect their fortunes from tax officials. The majority of the data comes from Appleby, a leading legal firm based in Bermuda. Appleby helps companies set up in overseas countries that have low or non-existent tax rates. Source BBC. The firm said Appleby has recently received inquiries from the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists and a number of media organizations who are partners of the ICIJ. These inquiries have arisen from documents that journalists claim to have seen and involve allegations made against our business and the business conducted by some of our clients. We take any allegation of wrongdoing, implicit or otherwise, extremely seriously. Appleby operates in highly regulated jurisdictions and, like all professional organizations in our regions, we are subject to frequent regulatory checks and we are committed to achieving the high standards set by our regulators. We are also committed to the highest standards of client service and confidentiality. It is what we stand for. This commitment is unequivocal. Appleby has thoroughly and vigorously investigated the allegations and we are satisfied that there is no evidence of any wrongdoing, either on the part of ourselves or our clients. We refute any allegations that may suggest otherwise and we would be happy to cooperate with any legitimate and authorized investigation of the allegations by the appropriate and relevant authorities. We are an offshore law firm that advises clients on legitimate and lawful ways to conduct their business. We do not tolerate illegal behavior. It is true that we are not infallible. Where we find that mistakes have happened, we act quickly to put things right and we make the necessary notifications to the relevant authorities. Having researched the ICIJ's allegations, we believe they are unfounded and based on a lack of understanding of the legitimate and lawful structures used in the offshore sector. The Paradise Papers are already sparking reactions from politicians who have branded the leak deeply worrying. Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell told the BBC, despite all the government's claims of cracking down on tax dodgers, this evidence confirms that tax avoidance is clearly continuing on an industrial scale. Either the Prime Minister or the Chancellor needs to explain how this scandalous behavior has been allowed to go on unaddressed for so long and what action is to be taken now. Liberal Democrat leader and former Business Secretary Sir Vince Cable also accused former Prime Minister David Cameron of failing to clamp down on offshore tax havens. Sir Vince was speaking in the wake of the release of so-called Paradise Papers detailing financial dealings of the wealthy. The veteran politician said in a statement the Paradise Papers suggest that a small number of wealthy individuals have been able, entirely legally, to put their money beyond the reach of the exchequer. Liberal Democrat leader and former Business Secretary Sir Vince Cable accused former Prime Minister David Cameron, pictured, of failing to clamp down on offshore tax havens. In the coalition government, I introduced the Register of Beneficial Ownership, which established who owns British companies, and sought to extend that to British overseas territories. This was to clamp down on tax havens operating under the British flag. David Cameron was initially attracted to the idea, but when the overseas territories said on a visit to London that they were against it, he backed down. Given these revelations, including news that Conservative donors benefited from these arrangements, we need a parliamentary select committee to investigate why, who decided what and why. In particular, we need the release of all government papers dealing with the decision not to clamp down on offshore tax havens. Only in this way can we ensure there is public confidence in the tax system. Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn said the data proves that there's one rule for the super rich and another for the rest when it comes to paying tax. His concern was echoed by Meg Hillier, the chairwoman of the House of Commons Public Accounts Committee, who said senior officials from Revenue and Customs (HMRC) would appear before the panel on Monday. She said British taxpayers will be rightly outraged by the content of these disclosures. Every pound moved offshore to avoid paying tax deprives public services of vital funds. The government talks tough about clamping down on aggressive tax avoidance, but once again we see Revenue, Customs being outmaneuvered. HMRC must investigate the very worrying allegations arising from this leak. Substantial amounts of money from the Duchy of Lancaster have been invested through funds in companies such as Bright House, which has come under fire for exploitation of vulnerable customers. Stock photo. One of the key figures named in the Paradise Papers is the Queen, who has around £10 million of her private cash invested in overseas accounts. Today's leaks center around a law firm named Appleby, which has offices in infamous offshore tax havens including the British Virgin Islands and Bermuda. It provided the structures that helped the world's rich and powerful to legally reduce their tax bills. Just weeks ago, the law firm revealed its data center in Bermuda had been compromised in a cyber attack. The breach is thought to have been the precursor to today's enormous leak, which implicates influential figures from across the world. Appleby counts KPMG, Uber, Apple and Nike among its key clients, with the prestigious law firm making $100 million in revenue annually. Substantial amounts of money from the Duchy of Lancaster, which pays the Queen and handles her estates, have been invested through funds in companies such as Bright House, which has recently come under fire for exploitation of vulnerable customers. The Duchy says it was unaware of its stake in Bright House, while large sums have also been ploughed into off-licensed chain Threshes, which went bust owing £17.5 million in UK tax. Bright House has been accused of overcharging customers and howardling to people with learning disabilities. It recently had to pay back £14.8 million in compensation to a quarter of 250,000 people. Despite no tax advantages being gained by investing her money offshore, the news is likely to fuel arguments that greater controls need to be placed on royal spending. Founded in the 13th century, the Duchy is a unique portfolio of land, property and assets held in trust for the sovereign. These range from office blocks in the Strand to holidays homes, Bolingbroke Castle and a swathe of the tidal mudflats in Lincolnshire. Among the more bizarre revelations is that U2 frontman Bono used a company based in Malta to invest in a Lithuanian shopping centre. They are not entitled to touch the capital of the estate, but profits from the property empire go into the privy purse, providing a private source of income for the monarch. The Queen is entitled to spend the money as she wishes, but also uses it to help support members of her family, including Prince Andrew, Prince Edward, Princess Anne and the Countess of Wes. In lieu of their official duties as members of the royal family, are no longer entitled to civil list payments. She voluntarily pays income tax on the revenue she receives. The chief finance officer of the £500 million estate, Chris Adcock, told the BBC, "Our investment strategy is based on advice and recommendation from our investment consultants and appropriate asset allocation. The Duchy has only invested in highly regarded private equity funds following a strong recommendation from our investment consultants." A spokesperson for the Duchy of Lancaster added, "We operate a number of investments and a few of these are with overseas funds. All of our investments are audited and legitimate. The Queen voluntarily pays tax on any income she receives from the Duchy." Questions have been raised over who controls Everton FC after the complex offshore dealings of two billionaires were laid bare by the Paradise Papers. Last year, Iranian businessman Fahad Moshiri sold his 15% stake in Arsenal FC to Russian oligarch Alisher Usmanov and used the money to buy a 50% stake in the Merseyside club. But secret documents leaked to the press suggest his original stake in Arsenal was funded by a gift from Mr. Usmanov, raising questions as to whether the Russian's money is now in Everton. Business partners Fahad Moshiri sold his stake in Arsenal FC to Alisher Usmanov last year. If that is so, the deal would be in breach of Premier League rules, which state that an individual who owns a stake of 10% or more in one club cannot own a single share of another. Mr. Moshiri's lawyers have said any such allegations against their client are false and that his football investments were paid for with his own money. The business associates bought a 14.58% in Arsenal in 2007 through an offshore company called Red and White Holdings. The Paradise Papers state that the funding for the purchase came from Epion Holdings, a firm owned by Mr. Usmanov. Mr. Moshiri's lawyers claimed that the client paid Mr. Usmanov back following the purchase. Mr. Moshiri, who used to work as Mr. Usmanov's accountant, described the allegations as crazy. He told the BBC, "If it is a loan, you owe the money back to him. If it is a gift, it is yours. It is neither of them because I paid for it." The associates increased their stake in Arsenal to 30.4% before Mr. Moshiri sold his half to Mr. Usmanov in February 2016. In 2016, Mr. Moshiri, pictured at Goodison Park, bought a 49.9% stake in Everton Football Club. The Iranian then bought a 49.9% in Everton FC, which reportedly cost £87.5 million. The deal raised suspicions at the time, with one Russian news publication initially reporting that Mr. Usmanov had bought the stake before removing the story from its website. Further questions were prompted when it emerged Everton's training ground, Finch Farm, was sponsored by the Russian oligarch's USM company. The Paradise Papers also reveal that U2 frontman Bono used a company based in Malta to invest in a Lithuanian shopping centre. The singer bought a share of Nude Estates, which went on to purchase the Ozra Mall shortly after it opened in 2007. 5 years later, the business was transferred to a company in Guernsey called Nude Estates One. Bono's spokeswoman told The Guardian Bono was a passive, minority investor in Nude Estates Malta Limited, a company that was legally registered in Malta until it was voluntarily wound up in 2015. Malta is a well-established holding company jurisdiction within the EU. A UK government spokeswoman said since 2010, the government has secured an additional £160 billion, more than the annual UK NHS budget, for our vital public services by tackling tax avoidance, evasion and non-compliance. This includes more than £2.8 billion from those trying to hide money abroad to avoid paying what they owe. There are 26,000 HMRC staff tackling tax avoidance and evasion, and we have provided an extra £800 million to fund their efforts. A fair tax system is a critical and key part of our plan to build a fairer society, and we are clear that everyone must pay what is due, at the right time. In a statement to Mail Online, the government of Bermuda said that much of the narrative concerns foreign nationals in other jurisdictions. A spokesman said the government takes these matters extremely seriously and is reviewing developments with all parties concerned, including the relevant international authorities. Bermuda consistently ranks as a global leader in tax and transparency, with tax treaties with over 100 governments. The Premier of Bermuda, David Burt, added, "We maintain high vigilance on any and all criminal activities, including cyber, as well as requiring leading standards on tax and transparency of all who do business here. We will not tolerate non-compliance in any of these areas, and are reviewing this incident and related matters, and will take any further action as required." By Tom Paine for the Daily Mail. Michael Hutchence's business manager shifted the rock star's millions into an offshore account to cash in on the 20th anniversary of the singer's death, it is claimed. The Paradise Papers show Colin Diamond set up a company called Helipad Plane in 2015 in the tax haven of Mauritius in order to benefit from the INXS frontman's unreleased S. The company suggests Diamond's company has sole rights to recordings, images, films, and related material embodying the performance of Michael Hutchence. The question of what happened to Hutchence's estate, said to be worth as much as £15 million, has been one of the biggest mysteries of the rock world. Hutchence's will said he left half his estate to daughter Tiger Lily, who was adopted by Bob Geldof at the age of 4. His death in a Sydney hotel room in 1997 sparked a bitter war over who should inherit his riches. His mother Patricia Glassip, father Cal and sister Tina fought through the Australian courts for 8 years only to be told by the executor that Hutchence owned virtually nothing. In fact, the 2005 court case revealed Hutchence's assets were being kept in a complex web of offshore trusts set up in tax havens and run by Diamond and others. Diamond maintained Hutchence had never wanted his relatives to inherit his fortune. However, this clashed with the rock star's will, which said he left half his estate to daughter Tiger Lily, who was adopted by Bob Geldof at the age of 4. He had also pledged to bequest £380,000 to Amnesty International and Greenpeace. These payments were never received. In another court case in 2010, Diamond claimed Hutchence had transferred all rights to INSX's material to Chardonnay, a company run by him, 4 years before his death.